The gravel road wound through the pines like a faded scar, its edges lined with grass that had crept in during the years I'd been gone. Each pop and crunch beneath the truck's tires felt like an old song I half remembered, one that tugged at something behind my ribs. The air smelled the same. Sap cold earth, the faint trace of rain. After 3 years of city fumes and neon lights, the mountain air hit like a truth I'd almost forgotten. I rounded the final bend. My cabin. Small, squat, and stubborn against the tree line, with the green tin roof duller than I remembered and the porch sagging a little on the left side. The stone chimney leaned like an old man resting after a long day. But it was mine. Every board, every nail. My father and I had built the deck with our own hands. I parked at the gate, heart thudding harder than I'd expected. Then I saw them. Bright orange signs, 6 of them, nailed to my fence posts in a perfect line like guards on duty. No Trespassing, each one shouted in black block letters, with a smaller stamp below it, Silver Creek Lakes HOA, authorized by M. Delaney, President. For a second I just stared. The absurdity of it froze me. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the smell of wet pine and something else. Glue and new paint, the scent of something recent. I walked up to the nearest post, ran my fingers over the sign. The corners were still sharp, the metal still cool. These hadn't been here long. What the hell was an HOA doing out here? When I bought this land 10 years ago, there wasn't even a proper road. Just a dirt path and a handful of old fishing cabins. I'd picked this place precisely because it was away from all that bureaucracy and noise. No one to be, or what color I could paint my porch. I turned slowly, scanning the clearing. More signs glared from the trees, even one nailed to the birch near the trail that led down to the creek. They'd turned my land, my home, into someone else's territory. My chest burned. I swung the gate open, the hinge protesting after years of disuse, and drove up the path toward the cabin. The tires kicked up dust, and the sound echoed against the same, yet somehow, wrong. My garden boxes were gone, replaced by a row of cheap wooden posts strung with rope. There was a new mailbox, 2 shiny black with HOA 7 stenciled in white paint. I killed the engine and stepped out. The silence settled heavy, no birds, no creek, just the faint hum of a vehicle in the distance. I was halfway to the porch when I hurtled. The low crunch of silver SUV rolled up, spotless, windows tinted. It slowed near my gate, then came to a stop. Out stepped a woman in a beige cardigan and pressed jeans. The kind of outfit that screams suburban authority. She had a clipboard tucked under one arm and sunglasses perched perfectly in her hair. "Can I help you?" she called, voice clipped confident. The tone of someone used to being obeyed. I wiped my palms on my jeans. I was about to ask you the same thing. This looked around like she hadn't heard me, her gaze sweeping over the cabin, the truck, the freshly nailed signs. "Actually," she said, taking a few steps forward, "this area has been designated as part of the Silver Creek Lakes Association. The land's under new management. Private conservation territory." My laugh came out sharp. "You've got to be kidding. I own this land." She smiled politely, but her eyes didn't. "You did," the count abandoned. "When you disappeared, I didn't disappear." I snapped. "I was deployed overseas. For 3 years. And I've got the deed in my truck if you want to see it." As she shifted her clipboard to her other arm. "I'm sorry for your service," she said, in a tone that told me she wasn't sorry at all. But the community couldn't leave unused property to fall into disrepair. "We've worked hard to restore the natural beauty here. The association took stewardship. I took a step closer, my boots crunching on the dirt. "You nailed your rules to my fence," and her chin lifted slightly. "You'll have to take that up with the board, Miss Cooper." "James Cooper." She nodded, jotting it down on her clipboard. "Mr. Cooper, I'm Margaret Delaney, president of the Silver Creek Lakes HOA. I suggest you refrain from removing those signs until we resolve this legally," I said, keeping my voice level but low. "Those signs are on my land. You've got about 10 seconds to take them down before I do it myself." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm stating a fact." The silence that followed was thick. A jay shrieked somewhere in the trees, the sound startlingly loud. Margaret's eyes flicked to my truck, then back to me. I could almost see her calculating, weighing whether to push or retreat. Finally, she smiled again. That tight, professional kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "You'll be hearing from our Hoyers," she said, turning on her heel. She climbed back into her SUV, slammed the door, and reversed down the road without another word. The dust cloud she left behind settled slow over the fence, blurring the orange of her signs until they looked almost rust-colored. I stood there for a long moment, fists clenched. Then I walked back to the nearest post and pried one of the signs off with the back of my pocket knife. The nails came loose with a metallic squeal. The paint caught the louvret in my hands. On the back, there was a faint stamp, "Property of Silver Creek HOA, Permit 42B." Permit, my ass, I muttered. I tossed the sign into the back of the truck and took a long look around the clearing. The cabin was smaller than I remembered, and lonelier, but it was still home. And now someone wanted to steal it under the name of preservation. Not happening. I unlocked the door. The hinges creaked, but it opened smooth enough. Dust motes spun in the sunlight like lazy ghosts. My old tools were still lined up on the wall, though rust had eaten the edges. The table still had the half-burned candle I'd left the night before I drove out. Everything smelled of old wood and memory. I set my bag down and went to the window, looking out toward the road. The SUV was gone, but the sign still glared in the distance like eyes. My jaw tightened. Tomorrow I'd go into town. I'd the county clerk pull my deed and get answers about this so-called HOA. But for now I just stood there, hand on the old window frame, listening to the silence of the mountain that had once been mine. Outside, a gust of wind tugged at the rope fence, making it creak and sway. The sound echoed through the pines, hollow and unsettling, as if the land itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. The next morning, I drove into town with the orange, "No trespassing," sign lying across the passenger seat like an accusation. The metal glinted in the sunlight, its edges biting into the worn leather. Every time the truck hit a bump, the sign rattled, a hard reminder that something about this whole mess didn't sit right. Silver Creek had grown since I'd been gone. What used to be a sleepy mountain town with one grocery store and a diner now had a craft coffee shop, a realtor's office, and a yoga studio squeezed between the hardware store and the post office. New cabins dotted the hillsides, their roofs gleaming metal instead of weathered tin. I wondered how many of those new residents Margaret had recruited to her little empire. The county records office was tucked behind the courthouse, a squat beige building that looked like it hadn't seen Pate's the 80s. Inside, the air smelled like dust, paper, and burnt coffee. Ceiling fans turned lazily above the rows of filing cabinets, their blades clicking with every rotation. Behind the counter sat a man about my age, his reading glow on his nose, the name tag read Carl. He looked up when I walked in, eyes flicking to the sign under my arm. "Morning," he said. "You planning to post that somewhere or take one down?" "More like trying to find out why it was on my fence to begin with," said, laying the sign on the counter. "Name's James Cooper. I've got property out by Silver Creek Lake. Lot 12, off Pine Hollow Road," Twinnet typing something into the computer. The old machine whirred and beeped like it was waking from a nap. "That's up in the conservation zone now, isn't it?" he asked absently. "It wasn't 3 years ago," I said. "Van, it's not supposed to be now." He glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "I've got the deed in my glove box. Bought it in 2015. He nodded slowly and tapped the keyboard a few more times. "All right. Let's see what the county's got on file." He disappeared through a swinging door and came back a few minutes later with a thick manila folder. It was heavy with paper, the top sheet curled from humidity. He dropped it on the counter and slid it toward me. "Here's the full record. Last updates from last year. That's when the HOA filed for land stewardship designation." I frowned. "Filed for what?" He leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "Basically, a conservation claim. They petitioned the county to include your lot in their managed zone. Said it was abandoned private land, and that they were assuming responsibility for maintenance." I flipped the folder open, scanning the documents. Most of it was standard. My deed, the tax receipts, a property survey from 2018. Then I saw Silver Creek Lake's HO dated just 6 months ago. It was printed on official-looking paper and signed by Margaret Delaney, president. "We, the undersigned, hereby assume stewardship of the following unoccupied properties under the Silver Creek Lakes Community Charter Article EVU Section B." My eyes stopped on the line listing the parcels. There it was. Lot 12, my cabin. Next to it, someone had written unclaimed C, no contact. Unclaimed, I muttered. I paid taxes every damn year. A car reached over and flipped a few pages back. "Let's see, yeah, here's your last payment. Received by mail, March 2023. That's a year and a half ago. So the county knew I was still paying." He nodded, frowning now. "Looks that way. This shouldn't have gone through." He tapped the notarized page. "They'd have needed proof of abandonment. Usually that means unpaid taxes, unregistered utilities, or no recorded owner contact. You've got all three. Can I get copies of all of this?" "Sure thing." He started toward the back room to use the copier. I watched him go, then looked back down at the folder. There was another document stapled near the bottom. Minutes from an HOA board meeting. Agenda item 40. Stewardship proposal. Margaret reported that the Cooper property remains unattended and has fallen into disrepair. Motioned unanimously to include Lot 12 in the community plan. Below that were 5 signatures. One name caught my eye. D. McAllister. Dan McAllister had been my neighbor for years. Retired carpenter, quiet, friendly enough. He used to bring over jars of homemade apple butter every fall. If he'd signed this, it meant Margaret had somehow convinced him I wasn't coming back. Carl returned with a stack of photocopies. "Here you go," he said. "Official stamps on the top page." I gathered them up, the edges still warm from the copier. "Appreciate it," I said. "One more thing. Do you know when this HOA actually started?" He scratches. "A couple years ago, maybe 3. Some folks moved in, bought up a few of the old cabins, and decided they needed rules. Next thing we knew, they had a board, bylaws, and monthly dues." "Typical, yeah," I said. "Typical." I turned to leave but stopped when he called after me. "You might want to talk to Linda over at Planning and Zoning. She's been keeping an eye on these land claims. Doesn't trust that HO one bit." I nodded my thanks and pushed through the glass door into the sunlight. The town felt it now, cleaner, maybe, but also colder. I climbed into the truck and sat there for a minute, looking at the papers spread across the seat. Each one felt like a piece of someone else's story about my life. The Lyme DC no contact kept flashing in my mind. How could they declare my land abandoned when the taxes were paid and the deed was clear? There had to be more to it. Maybe someone had fed the HOA false info. Maybe the county had been lazy. Or maybe Margaret had greased the right palms. I drove over to the Planning and Zoning office, a red brick building that used to be a schoolhouse. Inside, a woman in her 50s sat behind a counter piled high with maps. Her name tag read Linda Bowers. "Carl said you might be able to help me," I began, dropping the folder onto the counter. She adjusted her glasses and flipped through the pages with surprising speed. "Silver Creek Lakes HOA," she murmured. "They've been pushing boundaries since day one. Claimed 3 other properties in the past year. One got thrown out of court, but the other stuck. Can they just do that?" As she looked up, meeting my eyes. "Not legally. But they count on people not fighting back. Most of the landowners are part-timers. Vacation folks. They see a conservation label and figure it's no big deal. You're the first one to show up with paperwork." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "Well, I'm here now." She smiled slightly. "Good. Because from what I can tell, they filed that claim under a special easement law meant for public land, not private. If you contest it, you'll win. I can print you the statute. That help?" I said, my pulse quickening. She printed the section of law and highlighted the relevant lines. As she handed me the pages, she added, "You'll want to keep copies of those OA minutes. If they falsified a report to the county, that's fraud." The word hung between us. Fraud. As I walked the papers and thanked her. As I walked back to my truck, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from somewhere up the hill. It was the same smell I'd grown up with. The smell of home. But now it carried something sharper, something that felt like a challenge. I climbed into the cab, spreading the documents out across the dashboard. Deed, tax records, each one a letter, board minutes, legal statute, each one a weapon in a fight I hadn't asked for. As I started the engine, a pickup pulled up beside me. Behind the wheel was a man I recognized even through the dusty glass. Dan McCullister. His face was weathered, his cap pulled low, but his eyes met mine and held there for a beat too long before he looked away. He gave a half-hearted wave, then drove off toward the lake. I watched him go, the unease settling in deep. Something told me Margaret hadn't acted alone. And if Dan had signed that document, I needed to know why.